In the dusty heart of the frontier, where men gamble with fate and freedom is bought with pain, one lonely cowboy spent his last $3 on a marriage lottery and won something he never expected: a woman taller than his fear, stronger than his pride, and wilder than the land itself. This is not a story of luck. It's a story of what happens when love refuses to surrender. Old West stories where every heart has its frontier. Before we begin the story, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Part 1. The Barren Prize. Elias Stone clutched the rumpled ticket. His last $3, gambled on a marriage lottery, now bound him to an unforgiving fate. The announcement of his winning number brought not triumph, but a chilling realization. His bride was a woman of the Teton tribe, a figure of formidable grace and power, towering above the assembled crowd. She stood on the rough-hewn platform, bound with ropes that seemed almost ornamental against the raw strength of her wrists. Her dark eyes, deep as ancient riverbeds, swept over the faces of the townsfolk, an expression carved of defiance and weary resignation. For an eternity, Elias felt the earth drop from beneath his feet. This was not the future he had dreamed of. This was a challenge beyond his comprehension. For 3 relentless years, Elias had toiled at the Blackwood outpost, each day a relentless blur of aching muscles and calloused hands. His nights were spent on a thin pallet in a storage shed, the air heavy with hay and unspoken regrets. 2 weeks prior, a grizzled prospector in the dusty streets of Serpent Pass had spun tales of the lottery: $3, 1 ticket, 1 bride. Elias had scoffed. The idea, an absurdity born of desperation. Yet, the gnawing ache of solitude, a predator with sharp teeth, burrowed deeper with each passing sunset. So, he had spent his last $3, coins he'd hoarded for a new pair of sturdy boots, on the flimsy promise of a ticket. He had told himself it was folly, a fool's errand destined for loss. But a fragile ember of hope had flickered within him. Now that ember threatened to consume him in a blaze of public humiliation. The crowd, a beast of stares and mocking grins, turned its attention to him. Whispers snaked through the air. Someone behind him muttered of ill omens. Another laughed, a harsh braying sound that seared Elias's ears. He forced his leaden legs to move, pushing through the throng, each step a testament to a will he hadn't known he possessed, until he stood at the base of the platform. The woman's gaze met his. Her face remained a mask, unreadable as granite, yet her eyes spoke volumes of a world that offered no quarter, a life stripped bare of all expectation of mercy. Master Thorne, the burly merchant running the lottery, his breath thick with cheap cigar smoke, clapped Elias on the shoulder with false cheer. "Congratulations, friend. You've just won yourself a wife." The word wife curdled in Elias's mouth, a bitter jest. The heat climbed his neck, staining his cheeks crimson. He looked up at her once more. Her simple, worn dress did little to conceal her imposing presence. A cascade of long, dark hair fell down her back, a heavy curtain of night. Her shoulders were broad, her arms powerfully sculpted, and the very way she carried herself evoked the image of a wolf, magnificent, dangerous, and irrevocably caged. "What's your name?" Elias managed, his strained whisper swallowed by the crowd's dying murmurs. She offered no immediate reply. Those dark, unflinching eyes studied him, weighing him, and for a terrifying moment, Elias believed she would refuse to speak altogether. Then, in a voice like river stones worn smooth by currents, she spoke. "Zella." Master Thorne's grin widened, a predatory flash of teeth. "Well, Elias Stone, you and Zella here are bound by the terms of the lottery. 3 days, you've got to make it official at the Union Registry, or you forfeit your claim. Congratulations again, I say." With a theatrical flourish, as if unveiling a prized stallion, Thorn untied the ropes from her wrists. Zella slowly rubbed her chafed skin, her gaze never once straying from Elias. The crowd, their morbid curiosity sated, began to dissipate, their amusement fading into the dusty afternoon. Elias stood, rooted to the spot, lost in a daze of uncertainty. Zella descended from the platform, and the full extent of her height, her imposing stature, became starkly apparent. She moved with a liquid grace that defied her size, a predator's silent tread. When she stood before him, Elias had to crane his neck slightly to meet her eyes. "You do not want this," she stated. Not a question, but a flat declaration. Elias opened his mouth, but no words came. She was right. He did not want this. But neither did he know what else to do. And beneath the clamor of fear and confusion, something else, an unfamiliar stirring, began to take root within him. Before he could utter a sound, a boisterous voice cut across the square. "Stone, is that your new woman?" It was Silas, a burly hand from the Blackwood outpost, and he was not alone. 3 other men, ranch hands all, flanked him, their faces split by crude, mocking grins, as if they had just witnessed the most uproarious spectacle of their lives. In that instant, Elias knew, whatever followed would not merely define his immediate future with Zella, it would brand him forever in this isolated, judgmental town. Silas swaggered across the square, the absolute confidence of a man unaccustomed to refusal. His companions trailed, their heavy boots scuffing the dirt with each deliberate, menacing step. Elias felt his throat constrict, tight, and dry. He knew these men, their crude minds, their predatory intentions. "Stone, you gonna introduce us to your prize?" Silas halted a few feet away, his eyes raking over Zella's form with a possessive, unsettling gaze that made Elias's skin crawl. "Heard you blew your boot money on a ticket. Guess you figured you wouldn't need boots if you were gonna be on your back all day, eh?" The other men snickered, their laughter a guttural chorus, and Elias felt a flush of mortification flood his face. Zella remained impassive, a statue of stone. Her expression was a blank, unreadable slate. But Elias noticed her hands. They had subtly, almost imperceptibly, clenched into tight fists at her sides. Silas, too, registered the subtle shift. His grin widened, a cruel, triumphant sneer. "She looks like she could snap you in half, Stone. You sure you know what you're doing?" Elias forced the words out, his voice thin but resolute. "Leave it alone, Silas. Just leave it alone." Silas took a step closer, invading their personal space. "You won her fair and square, right? So that means she belongs to you now, just like a horse, just like a piece of land." He reached out, his thick fingers extending toward Zella's arm, and a cold, sharp dread pierced Elias's chest. But before Elias could even move, Zella reacted. Her hand shot out, intercepting Silas's wrist mid-reach. Her grip was iron, unyielding. Silas's smug grin faltered, replaced by a mask of surprise and burgeoning rage. He yanked, attempting to free his hand, but her hold was firm, absolute. The square had fallen silent. All eyes were fixed on the tableau. Zella leaned down, her face level with Silas's, and when she spoke, her voice was a low, steady current, laced with dangerous steel. "Touch me again, and you will lose the hand." Silas finally tore his arm free, his face a mottled red. "You hear that? She's threatening me. That's an assault, Stone. You better teach your woman some manners before someone else does." He spun to face the gathering crowd, his voice booming with indignation. "This is what happens when you let savages walk around like they're people. They forget their place." The word savage struck Elias like a physical blow. He saw Zella's jaw clench, her shoulders rigid, and a sickening clarity washed over him. This wasn't just about him. This was about every man in this town who viewed her as less than human, an object to be used, mocked, broken. Elias stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Silas and Zella. His voice, quieter than he intended, held unwavering steadiness. "She is not yours to touch, and she is not yours to insult." Silas stared at him for a long, pregnant moment, then erupted in a harsh, derisive laugh. "You defending her now? A woman who could probably bench press you? That's rich, Stone. Real rich." He turned to leave, then paused, a final venomous barb escaping his lips. "Enjoy your wedding night, if you survive it." The other men followed, their crude laughter echoing across the dusty square as they retreated. When they were finally gone, Elias turned to face Zella. She was watching him, her expression once again unreadable. "You didn't need to do that," she said. "I know. They'll make your life worse now. I know that too." She tilted her head slightly, studying him. For the first time since he had seen her on the platform, something in her eyes softened, imperceptibly, yet enough for him to notice. "Why did you buy the ticket?" Elias hesitated. The truth felt like a burdensome weight, too pathetic to voice aloud. But standing there, beneath her towering presence, the collective judgment of the town pressing down, he found himself answering with raw honesty. "Because I was alone, and I thought maybe someone else was, too." Zella didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was a quiet ghost of a sound. "Thorn, the merchant, bought me from a trader 3 months ago. I was taken from my people, after I fought back against men who tried to hurt a child. They said I was dangerous, said I couldn't be trusted, so they sold me." She paused, her gaze distant, lost in a landscape of memory. "I've been sold 4 times since then. Each time they promise it will be different. Each time, it's the same." Elias felt something brittle crack inside his chest. I'm not like them." "Maybe," Zella said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Or maybe you just haven't had the chance yet." Before Elias could form a reply, a man in a dark, worn coat approached. He was older, with silver threads woven through his dark hair, a tarnished badge pinned to his chest. Sheriff Brennan, the law in Serpent Pass. His gaze moved from Elias to Zella and back. "You Stone?" "Yes, sir. Got a complaint from Silas Briggs. Says your woman threatened him." "That true?" The sheriff's tone was flat, bored, hinting at an unspoken conclusion. Elias glanced at Zella. She watched the sheriff with the same calm, unreadable expression. He could tell her to remain silent, to let this play out as it always did, or he could choose a different path. He looked back at the sheriff, chin lifting slightly. Silas tried to touch her without permission. She stopped him. That's all. Sheriff Brennan studied him for a long, assessing moment. Then he sighed, a sound of weary exasperation. "You got 3 days to make this official, Stone, or she goes back on the block. My advice? Keep her out of town until then. Folks around here don't take kindly to trouble." He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the emptying square, leaving Elias and Zella standing alone, bound by an impossible circumstance. Part 2. Flight into the Wild. The night after the lottery was heavy and airless, the kind of darkness that pressed down like grief. Elias Stone walked beside Zella through the narrow dirt road behind Serpent Pass, the moon hanging low over the desert ridge. Neither spoke. Her tall shadow stretched far ahead, long and unwavering, while his own felt small beside it. The silence between them wasn't hostile, just uncertain, the silence of 2 people who hadn't yet decided whether fate had chained them together or given them a chance to escape their own loneliness. When they reached the Blackwood outpost, Elias stopped beside the small shed he called home. The lantern light from the main house flickered faintly across the fields. It isn't much, he said, ashamed before he even opened the door. But it's all I've got. Zella ducked through the doorway and looked around. The shed was barely large enough for one person. A crate served as a table. A thin blanket was thrown across a hay-stuffed mattress. She didn't say anything at first, only stood there, her head almost brushing the low ceiling. Finally, she said quietly, "You spent your last $3 for this?" Elias hesitated. "I didn't buy you," he said, almost defensively. "I just thought maybe there'd be something better than being alone." "Intended from now forsetted. Where how du vard I denine." Zella's dark eyes turned toward him, unreadable. Being alone is not the worst thing that can happen to a person. Her voice carried the weariness of someone who had already lost everything once. She sat against the wall, folding her arms across her chest. "You should have walked away when you saw me on that platform." "I thought about it," Elias admitted. "But I didn't like the kind of man I'd be if I did." Zella gave a low, bitter laugh. "Then you've made your life harder. Men here will not understand. They'll make sure you don't forget what you've done." "I already don't forget," he said, sitting across from her on the dirt floor. "Every time I breathe, I feel the weight of it. Maybe that's why I did it. To stop feeling like a ghost." Zella studied him for a long time, her face softening slightly in the dim light. "You think you saved me, but you didn't. You just gave me a different kind of cage." "Maybe," Elias said quietly. "But at least this one has a key." Her gaze flickered, not forgiveness, but the faintest spark of something that wasn't hate. After a while she pulled his blanket over herself, leaving him none. "You should sleep," she said. "Tomorrow you'll need to explain to your boss why you brought home a woman taller than his horses." He smiled faintly. "You take it. I'll be fine. You'll freeze. Then we'll both be cold." "Ready top of matters, grown 9 and he est." Zella said nothing, but she didn't give it back. They sat in silence, listening to the night breathe through the cracks of the wooden walls. Two exiles sharing the same air. Sometime after midnight, heavy boots crunched outside. Elias stood quickly as the door creaked open. Fletcher, the ranch owner, stepped in, his thick mustache casting a shadow over hard eyes. "Heard some nonsense in town," he said flatly, "that you brought back a Teton woman from the lottery." Elias straightened. "Yes, sir." Fletcher spat into the dirt. "Then hear this. You've got 48 hours to get her off my land. I don't care where you go or what happens next, but I won't have her here. Indeed, there's a miver." Elias's stomach dropped. "She hasn't done anything. That's not the point." Fletcher cut him off. "You keep her here. You'll bring trouble, and I won't protect you when it comes. You've got 2 days, Stone. After that, don't let me see either of you." He left without another word. The door slammed, and the silence that followed felt colder than the desert wind. Zella hadn't moved. "He's right," she said softly. "You should let me go." Elias turned to her. "And where will you go?" "The same place I always go," she said. "Away. I survive. That's all I do." "Not this time," he said. "Not alone." She looked at him like he was the most foolish man she'd ever met. "You don't know what happens to men who stand beside me." "I don't care," Elias said simply. "I made my choice." They left before dawn. Elias carried what little he owned: a canteen, a worn knife, a few coins. The world beyond the ranch was still and gray, the horizon just beginning to glow. They walked north, following the faint line of a wagon trail through the hills. The air smelled of dust and sagebrush, and the cold bit at their hands. Zella's stride was steady, her long legs cutting the distance effortlessly. Elias limped slightly, but he kept pace. After a while, she said, "You don't even know where we're going." "There's a settlement 2 days north. Heard they don't ask questions." "And if they do?" "Then we keep moving." She didn't answer, but the ghost of a smile touched her lips. You're either brave or very stupid. Probably both, Elias said. By sunrise, they had put miles between themselves and the ranch. The warmth began to rise, and Elias finally dared to breathe easy. For the first time since Serpent Pass, he let himself believe they might actually get away. That illusion ended when the sound of horses drifted from behind them, faint at first, then louder. 4 riders. Dust rose in their wake like smoke. Zella stopped, her eyes narrowing. They're coming for me. It est a Giza. Elias's hand went instinctively to his belt, though he had no gun. Then we make them regret it. The riders slowed as they approached. Silas was in the center, grinning like a man who'd been promised blood. Well, he drawled. A thief and his property. Didn't get far, did you? We're not running, Elias said. That right? Silas leaned forward in his saddle. The merchant says otherwise. Turns out that little lottery wasn't exactly legal, so she still belongs to him, and I'm here to take her back. Elias glanced at Zella, but her face was calm, carved in stone. He's lying, Elias said. No, she said quietly. He's telling the truth. The men laughed, sensing victory. One raised his rifle lazily. No need to die for her, Stone. Walk away, and no one gets hurt. Elias's heart hammered in his chest, but something inside him hardened. She doesn't belong to anyone. Silas's smile faltered. Big words for a dead man. The air snapped like a whip as the fight began. Zella moved first, a blur of strength and precision. She yanked the reins of a horse, toppling its rider to the ground. Elias lunged at Silas, dragging him off his saddle. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs and sent pain searing through his ribs. Gunfire echoed through the open plain, dust rising in thick clouds. Zella wrestled a rifle from one man and struck another with the butt of it. Horses screamed and scattered. Elias and Silas rolled in the dirt, each blow landing heavier than the last. Silas drew his pistol, but Elias caught his wrist and slammed it down. The gun fired once into the ground, the noise deafening. When the smoke cleared, only 2 horses remained. The others fled into the distance, their riders broken or gone. Zella stood over Silas, her chest heaving. Elias staggered to his feet, clutching his side. Zella crouched, grabbed Silas by the collar, and hissed, "You tell your merchant friend if he sends anyone else, I'll make sure none of them come back." She shoved him away. Silas scrambled onto a horse and rode off without looking back. The plain fell silent again. Only the wind spoke. Elias bent over, wincing. "You're not hurt?" "Not badly," Zella said. "But you—" She knelt, touching his ribs gently. "They're cracked." "I've had worse," he lied, though the pain made his vision swim. Zella tore a strip from her sleeve and bound his side as best she could. When she finished, she sat back, breathing hard. "You shouldn't have done that." "I didn't have a choice." "Yes, you did." Her eyes softened. "But you stayed anyway." He met her gaze, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Guess I'm still that fool from the lottery." There no became Midian 50 tome. A long silence stretched between them. The sun was sinking now, painting the hills gold. Zella looked toward the horizon. "We can't go north anymore. They'll be waiting." "Then where?" She pointed east, where the land rose into rugged hills. "My people used to hunt there. There are caves, hidden places. You think we'll be safe?" "For a time." She stood, offering him her hand. "If you can keep up." He smiled weakly and took it. Her grip was strong, steady, the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting beneath his feet. Together they turned toward the rising hills, their shadows stretching long behind them as the first stars began to appear. By nightfall, the plain was empty again. Only hoofprints and a trail of dust marked where they had been. Ahead of them, the wild waited, vast, silent, and uncharted. and somewhere in the darkness, a future neither of them could yet name. Part 3. Sanctuary and Sacrifice. The climb into the eastern hills tested every ounce of Elias's strength. Each step sent sharp pain radiating through his side, and every breath felt like a blade pressed against his ribs. Still, he kept moving. The landscape grew harsher, the ground turning from dust to jagged rock. The air thinned, colder, cleaner, as if the world above the plains belonged to different gods altogether. Zella moved ahead, steady and sure, her stride as natural as the wind itself. She didn't look back often, but whenever she did, her eyes lingered long enough to make sure he was still behind her. By midday, Elias's vision swam. The sun sat high, a white coin burning through the thin clouds, and sweat clung to his neck despite the chill. Zella paused at a ridge, scanning the slopes ahead. "There," she said finally, pointing to a dark seam of stone barely visible among the crags. "That is where we rest." When they reached it, Elias realized it wasn't just a shadow. It was an entrance, a narrow gap hidden behind a curtain of thorny brush. Zella pushed it aside and disappeared into the darkness without hesitation. He followed, bent low, one hand braced against the rock, the other pressed to his ribs. The world inside swallowed the light. For a few long moments, there was nothing but silence and the faint echo of their breathing. Then a faint glow appeared ahead, sunlight leaking through cracks in the ceiling. The cave opened into a wide, dry chamber. It smelled of earth and age. Strange shapes danced on the walls, ancient drawings painted in faded red. The ghosts of another time. Zella stood in the center, her head tilted back as if listening to something older than memory itself. Elias sank onto a flat rock, exhausted. "You've been here before," he said quietly. "When I was a child," she replied. Her voice softened, the sharp edges of survival dulling for a moment. "My grandmother brought me here. She said this place remembers those who come with respect." She walked to the far wall and traced her fingers along the painted symbols. "This was her mark," she murmured. "Every winter, we stored food here, dried meat, herbs, tools. She always said, 'The land provides, if you are wise enough to prepare.'" Elias watched her in silence. The light through the cracks touched her face in golden shadow, revealing not the fierce woman who had fought men twice her size, but something gentler, a daughter, a granddaughter, someone who had once belonged somewhere. When she turned back, her expression hardened again, though her eyes glimmered with memory. "Sit. I'll see to your ribs." "It's date." He obeyed, unbuttoning his shirt with clumsy fingers. Zella knelt in front of him, her movements efficient, deliberate. She pressed her hand lightly along his side. He winced as pain flared bright and hot. "2 ribs cracked," she said. "You'll need to rest." "We don't have time for rest," Elias said, though his voice betrayed how much he wanted it. "Then we make time," she replied, and began tearing a strip from one of the old blankets she'd found among the stones. She ground dried herbs between her palms, their scent sharp and clean: mint, pine, and something bitter. She pressed the paste against his ribs, and he felt the sting fade into a cool numbness. Her touch was firm but careful, her calloused fingers moving with surprising gentleness. When she finished binding him, she sat back, watching him. For a while, neither spoke. The firelight from a small flame she'd lit between the rocks danced on the walls, casting their shadows large and strange. Finally, Elias said, "You never told me what happened before Serpent Pass." Zella didn't move. "You already know enough." "I know what they said, but I want to hear it from you." She hesitated, her jaw tightening. "The child I fought for, she was my sister's daughter. Traders came to buy horses. They saw her and decided they wanted something else. I broke one man's arm, nearly killed another. The elders feared the marshal would come with soldiers, so they sold me to those same men." She turned her gaze toward the painted wall. They said it would keep the peace. Elias's hands clenched unconsciously. And your niece? She lived. That is all that matters. He stared at her, at the calm in her voice that barely hid the fury beneath. You sacrificed everything for her. Zella shrugged, though her eyes gleamed wet in the firelight. Wouldn't you have done the same? Elias's voice was soft, certain. Not everyone would. But you did. She didn't answer. Instead, she stood and walked to the entrance, staring out at the fading daylight. The desert below was vast, silent, merciless. Her tall frame filled the narrow gap, blocking the last of the Sunday. Elias rose slowly and joined her, ignoring the pain in his side. You miss them, he said. I miss what they were, before fear took them. She sighed. But fear is stronger than love. Most days. Not always. She turned her head slightly, looking at him. You think we're different? I think you're brave, he said. And I think bravery is what love becomes when it has no place left to hide. For a long moment, they stood in silence. Then Zella stepped closer, so close that Elias could feel the warmth of her breath. Her eyes searched his, not for pity, not for promises, but for something real. Why do you keep choosing me, Elias Stone? She asked quietly. You could have left me on that road. You could leave now. He smiled faintly, though his voice trembled. Because I've been alone too long. Because I know what it feels like to be thrown away. And because when I look at you, I don't feel small anymore. Zella didn't move, but something in her expression softened a fragile crack in the armor she had worn for years. Slowly, she reached out and brushed her thumb along his jaw. You talk too much, she whispered. He might have laughed, but she was already kissing him. It wasn't gentle. It was raw, desperate, filled with the ache of everything they had lost. For a moment, time dissolved. There was only the echo of heartbeats and the taste of firelight. When she finally drew back, her forehead rested against his. If we do this, she murmured, we will have nothing but each other. No safety, no peace, only us. Elias smiled faintly. That's already more than I've ever had. They stayed like that, breathing the same air, until the wind outside howled through the cave mouth, and the fire flickered low. The world beyond felt distant, just a faint hum of danger, waiting for them to step outside. Hours later, a faint sound broke through the quiet, the rustle of footsteps, cautious but deliberate. Zella straightened, her hand going to the bone-handled knife she'd found among her grandmother's things. Elias followed her gaze toward the entrance. A figure stood in the dim light, framed by the moon beyond the rocks. Zella, a woman's voice said, calm, low, unshaken. I have been looking for you. Zella froze. Nish, she breathed, the name half curse, half prayer. The woman stepped forward, her face illuminated by the firelight. Older, streaks of gray in her dark hair, but the same fierce eyes. Hello, sister, she said softly. You've made quite a story for yourself. The lever givned danced. The danced by their untergrive. Zella's grip on the knife tightened. You shouldn't be here. Nish ignored the warning. The elders sent me. They bought your contract from the merchant. You're free now. Elias blinked, not sure he'd heard correctly. Free? Nish nodded. She pulled a folded paper from her coat. The deed says you belong to no one. Not to him. Not to anyone. The price nearly emptied the tribe's stores. But it's done. You can come home. Zella didn't move. Why now? Because my daughter asks for you every night, Nish said quietly. She remembers what you did for her, what you gave up. She wants to see you again. The silence that followed was sharp as glass. Zella looked down at the fire, her expression unreadable. What's the price? Nish's voice softened. If you return alone. The elders won't allow him. Her gaze flicked to Elias, then back. They fear war with the settlers. They fear what you've become. Elias swallowed hard. Zella, she raised her hand to stop him. They freed me to own me again, she said bitterly. They call it peace, but it's still chains. It's safety, Nish insisted. For you, for all of us. No, Zella said. It's fear. Elias's voice was low, steady. You should go, Zella. See your niece. See your family. Her head whipped toward him, disbelief flashing in her eyes. You want me to leave you? Something seven doing. And he met her gaze without flinching. I want you to be free. Truly free. You deserve that. Zella stepped closer, fury and heartbreak colliding in her expression. And what about you? I'll survive, he said quietly. I always do. The words hit her like a slap, her own words thrown back, stripped of all comfort. For a long, terrible moment, she just looked at him. Then she turned to her sister. Tell them I refuse. If freedom costs me him, I don't want it. Nish's shoulders sagged. I knew you'd say that. She tucked the paper back into her coat. Then listen carefully. The merchant knows the tribe bought your contract. He's angry. He's paying men to hunt you both. You have a day, maybe two, before they reach these hills. West of here there's a settlement near the border, rough, forgotten. You could disappear there. Start over. Zella's expression softened, but her voice stayed steady. Why are you telling us this? Nish's eyes glistened. Because you're my sister. And because maybe choosing someone who chooses you is worth more than being safe. She turned to go but paused at the cave's mouth. My daughter changed her name to Ka, she said. She said it means her life is her own. I thought you should know. Then she vanished into the dark. Zella stood still for a long time, her back to Elias. When she finally turned, her voice was soft but raw. You were going to let me go. Yes, he said. Even if it destroyed you? He nodded. Yes. She took 2 steps toward him and stopped, trembling. You are a fool, Elias Stone. I've been called worse. She moved then, closing the distance between them, pressing her forehead to his chest. Then we go west, she whispered. Together. He wrapped his arms around her, feeling her strength, her heat, her pulse. Together, he echoed. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the low, distant rumble of hooves. Zella lifted her head, her body tensing. Elias heard it, too faint, rhythmic, relentless. The sound of pursuit. He met her eyes, and in that wordless exchange, both understood. The reprieve was over. The wild was calling again. And this time, it would not let them rest. Part 4. The Uncharted Path. Zella grabbed Elias's hand, her grip firm and urgent, pulling him deeper into the cave. There is another way out. A passage my grandmother showed me. It is narrow, but we can fit. They moved quickly through the darkness, Zella navigating by memory, while Elias kept one hand on her back, relying on her guidance, and the other pressed against his aching ribs. Behind them, voices began to echo into the cavern, growing louder, closer. Men shouting, their heavy boots scraping on stone. The merchant had sent more than just riders this time. He had sent hunters. The passage Zella led them through was barely wide enough for her shoulders. Elias had to turn sideways in places, biting back groans as the strenuous movement pulled at his injured ribs, each jostle sending a fresh wave of agony through him. But they kept moving, kept pushing forward, the fear of capture a sharper goad than any pain. Finally, the passage opened up, and they stumbled out onto a rocky hillside, gasping for the crisp night air. Below, they could see the flicker of torches moving through the darkness. The men were spreading out, their figures like predatory insects crawling across the landscape, searching. They will find the passage eventually, Zella whispered, her voice tight with urgency. "We need distance. Fast." She looked west, toward where Nish had said the settlement lay. 3 days on foot, maybe 2 if they pushed hard and did not stop. But Elias was already struggling, his breathing labored, his face pale, even in the pale moonlight. "I will slow you down," he rasped, the words tearing from his throat. "Then we go slow. Together." Zella took his arm and wrapped it around her shoulders, supporting his weight. Her strength was a palpable presence against him, an anchor in a churning sea. "We made it this far, Elias. We are not giving up now." They moved through the night like ghosts, using every shadow and every rock for cover. Zella's inherent knowledge of the land their only guide. She knew which paths made noise underfoot, and which stayed silent. Knew where water ran in hidden streams, erasing their tracks. Knew how to read the stars, keeping them moving in the right direction even when exhaustion threatened to drag them both down into the unforgiving earth. By the time the sun rose on the first day, painting the eastern sky in hues of bruised purple and pale gold, they had put miles between themselves and the cave. But the pursuit did not stop. Throughout that day and the next, they saw riders on the horizon, distant figures silhouetted against the sky, saw the faint, telltale smoke from distant camps. The merchant was not giving up. He had invested too much in Zella, lost too much face in the eyes of the town. This had become about more than money. It had become about pride. And pride, Elias knew, was a dangerous, unyielding force. On the second night, they found a meager shelter in a dried riverbed, beneath a precarious overhang of rock. Elias's fever had started that afternoon, his body finally rebelling against the cracked ribs, the relentless movement, the constant fear. He shivered uncontrollably, his teeth chattering, his skin burning cold and hot by turns. Zella held him close, using her own powerful body heat to keep him warm, her arms a strong, unwavering embrace. She whispered to him in her own language, Teton. Words he did not understand but that sounded like ancient prayers or solemn promises, or both, woven into the fabric of the desolate night. "I am slowing you down," he mumbled through chattering teeth, his voice weak. "You are keeping me human," she replied, her voice soft but resolute, a balm against the torment of his fever. "Without you, I would be just survival, just anger, just running. With you, I have a reason to stop running, a reason to build something instead of just endure." She kissed his forehead, a feather-light touch, yet it carried the weight of her conviction. "So rest, Elias. Tomorrow we reach the settlement. Tomorrow we start over." The third day dawned gray and cold, but with a flicker of renewed hope. Elias's fever had broken sometime in the night, leaving him weak and drained, but clear-headed. The throbbing in his ribs remained a constant companion, but it was a dull ache now, not the sharp, blinding pain of before. They helped each other up, moving slowly, deliberately, their steps heavy but unwavering. By midday, they saw it. A cluster of buildings nestled in a wide, sprawling valley, smoke rising lazily from chimneys, the faint, yet distinctly human, sound of hammers and voices carrying on the biting wind. The settlement, small, rough, and in its profound isolation, utterly beautiful. They walked into town together, 2 figures who looked like they had been through a war, and in a way, they had. The settlement was exactly as Nish had described. Rough enough that people did not ask too many questions. Isolated enough that the merchant's influence did not seem to reach this far, its tendrils of control severed by distance and wilderness. The first person they spoke to was a woman running a boarding house, her face a map of sun-baked wrinkles, her eyes shrewd but not unkind. She took one long, assessing look at them, Elias, pale and favoring his side, Zella, tall and weary, but with an unyielding fire still burning in her dark eyes, and nodded toward the stairs. $3 a week, she said, her voice gruff but fair. Includes meals. No trouble. No trouble. And you can stay. No trouble, Zella agreed, her voice raspy from disuse, but firm. That night, after they had eaten a simple but warm meal, after they had washed away the grime of days on the run, after they had finally felt safe enough to truly breathe, they stood together in the small room they had rented. It was not grand, far from it, but it had a real bed, a real window looking out onto the quiet street, a real door that locked from the inside. Luxuries they hadn't known they missed until they had them again. Solid and tangible. Elias took Zella's hand, intertwining their fingers, his thumb gently caressing her knuckles. "I know this is not what you imagined," he began, his voice soft, a hint of vulnerability in its tone. "When you thought about getting married, no ceremony, no witnesses, no fancy dress, just us, and a room barely bigger than the shed I used to live in." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers for a hint of regret. "It is perfect," Zella said, and her voice, though quiet, held an absolute certainty that left no room for doubt. She meant it, because it was theirs, earned through blood and fear, and the fierce, unyielding refusal to give up on each other. She reached up, her strong, calloused fingers gently touching his face, tracing the weary lines around his eyes. A cowboy won a marriage lottery for $3, and found the bride was a giant Teton woman. That is how the story starts. But this is how it ends. Not with him owning her, not with her needing him, but with two people choosing each other every single day. That, she finished, her gaze unwavering, is our story. Elias smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes, chasing away some of the weariness that had been etched there for years. "That is a better ending than I deserve." "The great Don, then it is a good thing," Zella replied, a soft smile gracing her lips. "You do not get to decide what you deserve. I do." And she leaned in and kissed him, a deep, lingering kiss that sealed their words, their journey, their desperate, defiant hope. They held each other in that small room, the silence of the settlement settling into a comfortable blanket around them, as the world outside continued its relentless turning. Men still hunted, merchants still schemed, tribes still struggled for survival. But in that room, in that moment, two people who had been told they were worthless, who had been discarded and sold, found something infinitely more valuable than gold. They found each other, and they found home, not in a place, but in the unwavering connection between them. Part 5. The Enduring Home. 3 months later, the settlement near the border, a place of hard work and harder silence, had become their sanctuary. Not perfect, not easy, but theirs. Elias's ribs had healed, leaving only a faint ache on cold mornings, a quiet memory of a pain overcome. Zella's eyes, once so guarded, now held a light he hadn't thought possible, a steady warmth that reached him even across a crowded room. They stood before a circuit judge, a weary man with kind eyes and a knowing smile, his office smelling of old paper and dust. There were no grand pronouncements, no joyous celebration, just the scratch of a pen on official documents, solidifying a bond that had already been forged in fire and flight. Papers and signatures, and all the things society required, finally caught up to the truth that had long been settled in their hearts. For the real marriage, the one that truly mattered, had already happened. It wasn't the lottery ticket, nor the judge's signature, that had bound them. It was in the square, the precise, terrifying moment Elias had refused to walk away, choosing to stand between Zella and the town's judgment, between her and men who saw her as less than human. It was in the quiet intimacy of the shed, when Zella, hardened by years of betrayal, had first shown him a flicker of vulnerability, a profound weariness that pierced his own solitude. It was in the dust of the road, when they fought as one against Silas and his men, a chaotic dance of desperation and surprising powerful synergy, where their lives had intertwined in a way that defied all expectation. It was in the shadowed depths of the ancient cave, when Zella had recounted her sacrifice for her niece, a raw confession that laid bare the fierce, protective core of her being, and when Elias, in turn, had revealed his own aching loneliness, his desperate, fragile hope. That was the moment of their true union, a kiss born not of convenience, but of shared wounds and the radical, bewildering choice to truly see each other. They had run, yes, but they had also chosen to risk everything, chosen to build something, chosen to belong to each other when no one else would have them. Everything else, the papers and the laws, was just catching up to a love that had already taken root, deep and unyielding, in the harsh, unforgiving soil of the frontier. In this new settlement, they built a life, simple, honest, and entirely their own. Elias found work at the lumber mill, the rhythmic thud of the axe and the earthy scent of fresh-cut wood a grounding presence. The labor was hard, but it was honest. And each day, he returned to their small room with a sense of purpose he'd never known. He worked alongside other men, rough and taciturn. But here, his past remained his own. No one asked about a marriage lottery or a giant Teton woman. They just saw a man who worked hard, a man who kept to himself, and they respected that. Zella, too, found her place. Her hands, so powerful and precise, quickly earned her a reputation. She started a small business repairing saddles and tack, her skill quickly spreading by word of mouth among the ranchers and traders who passed through. People brought her their broken straps, their worn leather, their saddles in need of expert hands, and she, with a focused intensity that silenced any doubt, would restore them. Each stitch a testament to her meticulous craftsmanship. Her quiet strength was undeniable, her competence irrefutable. The wary glances she might have once received in Serpent Pass were replaced by respect, a grudging admiration for a woman whose work spoke louder than any prejudice. No one asked about her tribe, or her past, or the fight on the road. They simply saw the quality of her work, the unwavering steadiness of her gaze, and learned that here, in this remote corner of the world, strength and integrity were the only currencies that truly mattered. They learned not to ask where each other came from, not in so many words, but in the shared understanding that their journey was etched on their souls, and it was enough that they had arrived, together. The quiet strength they carried, each reflecting the other's resilience, became a silent beacon. They were an unlikely pair, a cowboy and a Teton woman, who, against all odds and against the crushing weight of a world determined to break them, had found something profound. They proved that sometimes, the best stories are not about conquest or power, but about two people standing against the world, discovering, day by arduous day, that they are stronger together than they ever were apart. And when, occasionally, someone new to the settlement, hearing the whispers of their unusual past, would ask Elias if he regretted spending his last $3 on that lottery ticket, he always gave the same answer, his voice calm and certain, a smile touching his lips. Best investment I ever made. In that small room, in that quiet settlement, they found something infinitely more valuable than gold. They found each other, and they found home, not in a place, but in the unwavering, unbreakable connection that had grown between them. It was a home built on trust, forged in shared struggle, and sustained by a love as fierce and wild as the frontier itself. 3 months had passed since their escape, since they had stood trembling in the shadows, listening to the thunder of hooves, expecting their world to shatter. Now, the thunder had faded, replaced by the gentle rhythm of their shared lives. Their bond, initially forged in desperation, had deepened into an unshakable partnership, They had faced down fear, battled prejudice, and carved out a space in the world where they could truly be free. This is a testament to the human spirit, a frontier legend of an unlikely couple who dared to defy fate. It's a reminder that even in the harshest landscapes, amidst the most brutal challenges, love can blossom in the most unexpected places. It's a story of choosing bravery over fear, connection over solitude, and hope over despair. Their journey reminds us that the greatest wealth is not found in gold or land, but in the bonds we forge, the sacrifices we make for those we cherish, and the unwavering courage to stand together against whatever storms may come. And perhaps, that is the true prize. If this tale of defiance and enduring love resonated with you, there are countless other stories waiting to be discovered, where ordinary people find extraordinary strength, and where the untamed frontier shapes destinies in unforgettable ways. We invite you to continue exploring these narratives of courage and connection. Your journey into the heart of the Wild West is far from over. In the end, Elias Stone didn't win gold, land, or fortune. He won something rarer: a home in another person's soul. Their story began with a cruel gamble, but it ended with a love that no man, no law, and no storm could break. If this tale of courage and devotion touched your heart, stay with us, because out here in the frontier, every sunset hides another legend waiting to be told. Subscribe to Old West Stories and ride with us into the next tale.